We're going to take a look at Autodesk MatchMover 2010, which is included with Maya 2010, as well with the Maya 2010 suite of products. So what we're going to do is actually take a look at, in this specific example, how we can apply some 2D tracking to some real footage, and then bring it into Maya and lock in a CG element here. So here we have a 3D model of a little rocket base with a rocket. And we want to track that into some real footage. So let's take a look at MatchMover and the overall process as to how this works here. So what we can do is actually take a look at the load sequence options here. I have a series of images for some footage. They're HD resolution. You can see from the file type drop-down menu here, it's just about any type of file you can imagine here. You can bring in QuickTime movies as well as image frame sequences there. And then there are a couple different settings that you can set your end frame for your sequence length, as well as some camera settings here for motion, your frame rate, and your focal length, whether it was a shot with a constant focal length or a variable focal length. So I already actually have some footage cached in here into MatchMover. So we can just play that back. We'll just take a quick look at the footage here. You can see that it's just tracking in over a farmer's field, and we want to kind of put our little CG rocket base in there and then just track kind of a rocket launching up there. So let's take a look at how we can go about and do that. So one of the first things that we can take a look at are the different options for tracking. In this case, I'm going to go under the 2D tracking menu here, and I can go ahead and hit New Track. And what this is going to allow me to do is actually produce my own hand manual tracking here. So I'm not going to hand track, of course, every frame, but I can start to specify specific points that I want to work with. So if we just actually scroll through this footage a bit, I think I'm going to put the base in and around this area here, so we can probably work with a couple of those points. So we can just quickly go in. You can see it kind of magnifies, and we're looking for some different areas of contrast, some dark right to blacks, and some lights on the white end of the spectrum there that we can go ahead and track. And then I can just start going ahead. I'm just going to keep this really simple here. I'll go ahead to 25 frames, and we'll just plop it into the same area. And I can just go ahead to just up to 50 here as well. So by no means am I putting down an enormous amount of tracks on here, but the great thing about what I've just done there, you can see if I scroll back, you can see it's following essentially keyframes of where I've dropped it down. I can now go underneath my 2D tracking. You'll see actually in my menu here, my point tracks, track 1. So just to show the process here, I can go ahead and hit track forward. And what this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and track. It's telling me right here that the point is actually leaving the image because our camera follows it up at one point. But the nice thing is, just from that simple little track, you can see just from dropping down 3 frames there essentially that we're actually tracking that in somewhat, which is quite nice. But an even better thing here that we can go ahead and use, I can just leave that point right in here, is MatchMover's ability to automatically track a sequence for you. So let's take full advantage of that and take a look at how that works. So if I go ahead and pick my automatic tracking selection underneath my 2D tracking menu or hit F10, it brings up a nice little menu here giving me some options. So I can jump in and take a look at some different tracking options here. I can set the minimum length of my track, and I can also adjust things like sensitivity. I can also adjust how I want this the image to be tracked here. Do I want to use the grayscale form of the image or the actual color gradient of the image here? So you can see a preview image in here. If I go ahead and select colors, you can see some adjustment of those points as well. I'm going to leave it grayscale, which essentially means it's going to take a look at that kind of black to white spectrum to grasp onto some points for our track of our sequence. And I'm just going to leave everything else as the default on there. And if I just go ahead and hit run, it's going to go ahead and run a whole track through here, and then we can see how the tracking points lock into our scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit run. This is going to run through a whole sequence here, so I'll just kind of speed it up and come back to our track. We can play it back here. So we can take a look at our completed track here. We can take a look at our tracks that have solved. I can actually go around, the same thing with our manual track, and just click on it or just highlight any of the points, and it's going to show you kind of a preview of the entire track going forward on there as well. So if we just play it back, you can see that we have quite a few points tracking all sorts of different data in our footage there, right up through the clouds in the sky. And I just have it set back to play back on swing back here, so we can go back and check out these tracks here as well. And the cool thing about this is that we can actually go and clean up some of that data. We can manually go and clean this up here, but we can also use a clean assistant here. And what this will do is it allows us to actually set some things here. With the default is the track count is set to keep 30 tracks per frame. So we could set that. And the nice thing is we could have it run through and clean up our scene. That would be especially useful for a really dense point cloud, for a very dense tracked scene, to go down and clean that up. We could also set it to filter out by lifespan, so to keep tracks that are at least X number of frames in length. So the longest tracking points of the scene, you could set it just to keep mostly those. Residual, you can actually set a threshold to keep points with a residual lower than, and then lastly, hard tracks, always keep the hard tracks. I'm just actually going to leave our data as is, and then if we just go ahead and go down to export, you'll see some of our settings here. The file type, there's plenty of different 3D applications that are available for us to export it out. You can see that we have FBX in there as well, and in this case, for this example, I'm going to use a Maya ASCII format. So I can just go ahead and actually set this. We'll just leave it as rocket footage track, and you can see that I have set in here, I'm going to leave the defaults, the hard and soft tracks, and then actually the rating of the quality of my tracks. So I can set this just to export out the good. I'm going to leave it to export out everything. I'm just going to leave the defaults on this, and we can just go ahead and hit save, and it just writes out a quick little .ma file. So if we switch over into Maya here, I actually have the footage already kind of pre-cached in here, just for the interest of time for this. But if we take a look in the outliner, what the MatchMover export brings in is actually its own camera from MatchMover, and then the tracking group, so the auto tracks and any other tracking that we may have done in there. So we can take a look in here. If I actually just go and turn the camera off, you can see that we have a couple little simple tracking points just to preview in there, and we'll actually just kind of hide those guys right out of there for now. And then if we bring in our footage, you can see this thing is actually tracking in quite nicely, but it's a little bit large on there. So let's just bring our outliner in there again and actually go ahead and just kind of track all of these guys in here. So I can just go ahead and actually start to kind of move them around. So you can see that from the playback, it's actually pretty solid the way it's tracked in. But now I can just go in and just start to kind of pick the area that I want to work with here. So I'm just going to kind of work this guy into here. So I'm just kind of rotating my footage, or my little CG base around here, and getting my model into place here. So maybe we'll just go to turn selection highlighting off, and we can just work with the overall placement of it. And then of course the nice thing is I can go and play it back here. Anyways, we can just go ahead and tweak in our translation, rotation, and scale as needed. I'm just going to turn that off and turn on a fully adjusted one here, and it actually is complete with some little end particles here for our scene. So I'm playing this back real time in Maya. So you can see that our tracked in 3D element and the camera that looks up into the sky, and we have the rocket working with that in there as well. So there's an overview of MatchMover 2010, a very cool and powerful new tracking feature included with Maya 2010.